So today we're talking about diagnostics. Oh, there we go. Okay, so everybody gets scared about diagnostics. Why is it so difficult? What do you think? Well, part of the reason it's so difficult is you're dealing with a lot of different things. So when you go to your own doctor, one, you can tell them what's wrong. Plants aren't able to communicate with us directly. And also your doctor is dealing with one species, just with humans. When we're dealing with plant problems, we're dealing with many different species. There are about 5,000 species listed in the plant tool base, and that is only a fraction of the number of plants that are grown in North Carolina. And it's only, if you don't even count cultivars, there's hundreds of cultivars of some of these plants, and things, susceptibilities can differ between different cultivars. So that's one reason. Another thing is there's thousands of different diseases. So there's 80,000 different plant diseases identified in the world. 50,000 occur in the United States. I wasn't able to find a number on North Carolina, but I'm going to guess it's in the tens of thousands. That's just the diseases. We haven't even talked about insects yet. So it's a vast amount of knowledge. You can't possibly know all of that. And that's why we have to do a diagnostic procedure to figure out how do we narrow down what's causing this problem. Even though it seems scary, if you take patience and do your research and follow all the tools that we give you, it really won't be that difficult. And if you still can't figure it out, there are other steps you can take to find answers. So the main thing you want to do is take a very deliberate approach. And the way to do that is through these 10 diagnostic steps. They are identifying the plant. That is the number one thing that you need to do, is know what plant you are working with. So you need to ask questions and make sure that the person asking about their problem knows what they're dealing with. Just have them describe the problem. Know what's normal. Ask them questions about what are their cultural practices, what have they been doing. Ask about environmental conditions. And this is something, the environmental conditions is something that you might want to keep in your own mind about what the weather has been, what the climate's been doing, what happened a couple months ago. Those are things that can still influence a plant today. So keep that in mind. You'll look for signs of pests and pathogens. I'm sure you've all gone over signs and symptoms. And then you want to ask questions about distribution in the landscape, distribution of damage on the plant, and finally, what are the different timing? We're going to go through each of these things in more detail. So if you didn't get them all now, you should have them in your handouts. Okay, so correctly identify the plant. So obviously, you don't know what the plant is, you can't know what problems it's going to have. If possible, you want to also know what cultivar or what variety somebody's growing, because there are differences in cultivars and varieties with susceptibility. An example here is the tomato. A lot of people like to grow heirloom variety tomatoes. Well, heirloom varieties are not bred to be resistant to things like fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, nematode damage. So they're very susceptible to those things, but more modern hybrid varieties have been bred to be resistant to a lot of these diseases and problems. So it's important if you can find out what cultivar they're growing. Okay, next you want to have them describe the problem. What appears to be wrong with the plant? What part of the plant is affected? Is it the whole plant? Or is it only stems? What can they see that's going on? Just ask as many questions as you can to get as much detail. So what is normal is the next thing. Normal can look abnormal, and sometimes people don't know what's normal. Now, this is kind of an extreme example. It's a pretty tree with yellow leaves, and it's been bred that way, and people would usually choose a tree like that deliberately. But as you can see, it's all yellow, and a lot of times yellow indicates a disease problem. So somebody not knowing that it's a yellow variety, if it was young and just came out with yellow leaves, they might think, what's wrong with my tree? But because I think that way when I tend to stay away from yellow plants, because I think most plant pathologists think of yellow as a disease problem. So we shy away from those plants in our yards. Another issue might be things that people just haven't noticed before, and all of a sudden they notice them. So they don't realize that ferns may have two kinds of fronds. They have fertile fronds and sterile fronds, and they're used to the sterile fronds. And when they see a fertile frond with spores and sori on it, they think, oh my gosh, something's growing on my fern. Well, no, that's perfectly normal. All right, this is a big one, cultural factors. Lots of questions can be asked about cultural factors. First of all, let's start with planting. How long has the plant been there? How did you plant it? Who installed it? Was it balled and burlapped? Was it root bound or put in the ground properly? So you want to make sure that they know how to dig a hole, that it's not planted too deeply, that they haven't made a mulch volcano or other things. There's lots of things people do wrong when planting. So those are great questions to ask. This is a good example here of a properly planted hole, properly made hole for this plant. Staking is another thing. A lot of people, when they put in trees at first, they like to stake them because they're worried they're going to be wobbly or something. So you can stake things properly, and that's good. But things can go wrong with staking as well. If things are left on there too long, moisture can build up, leading to conditions for fungi or other pathogens to grow. If it's too tight and the tree can't move, it can become weak. So there's issues with staking. So you want to ask, how long has it been staked? It should be removed after a certain period of time. Next, and also the type of things you put on the plant can wound the plant if it's not properly staked. Pruning is a big one. A lot of people get real scared about pruning, and they just hack away, or they don't prune properly. They can create problems by improperly pruning. We've all heard about crepe murder, where people like to cut it back and these weak little stems growing out. So proper pruning, if that's an issue. This is an example here. That one's done right. This one done wrong. They have big open cuts. They cut back all the things. They just hack that thing away. So of course they're going to get problems. All right, what other cultural factors are there? Well, fertility is a huge thing. Over-fertilizing and under-fertilizing. So one of the questions you want to ask is, have you gotten a soil test? Most people are probably going to say no. You say, oh, did you know that you can get a free soil test between April and November? So that's something that you want to inform people about. Tell them how to get a soil test. And just the reason it's free during those times and not the other times of year is during the rest of the year, farmers are given priority, and there's an overwhelming demand during the months when farmers and professional growers are getting their properties ready for growing, that they want to slow down the trickle, so they start charging you during those busy months. Okay, we have mechanical damage. Mechanical damage can occur from many different kinds of things, from barbed wire, from hitting things with a lawnmower, all kinds of different mechanical damage might occur. It could occur young in the life of a tree, and that wound may not show up for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden the tree starts dying. Well, what happened? It may have been due to mechanical error. Pesticides, we've heard about pesticide drift last week. I'm sure you've probably heard that as well. That can be an issue. You have to get people to think back, gee, was any pesticide applied by you or a neighbor or surrounding property? And this is the kind of damage that can occur. And the other really big one is water management. This is probably one of the most important factors involved in problems, either too much water, not enough water, or improper drainage in the soil. A lot of times it might have just not be getting able to drain away, so that plant's sitting in wet space. A lot of plants, especially over the winter, really don't like to have what they call wet feet. Muley grass is one. If it's wet over the winter, it will suffer. There's a lot of plants that are like that. But the other issue with water management, someone might say, well, I did water it. Well, they might have had mulch on it that we talked about, it getting hydrophobic at times, where the water doesn't penetrate down into it, just rolls off or runs away. It's not getting into the soil. So that's another issue that you want to make sure, especially after a drought. A lot of times the ground itself can become hydrophobic where the water just doesn't penetrate well. All right, next is environmental factors. These are similar to cultural factors, but these are things that are totally beyond our control. You can't control the weather, temperature extremes, big fluctuations. This is something that actually happens frequently in our area. Late winter, we get a nice mild spell. The plants have received their dormancy requirements, so they get mild spell. They think, it's time to break dormancy. They may, if the spell lasts long enough, they start to break that dormancy and start to grow. And then we get hit with a really cold snap. And all that tender tissue gets damaged. That damage may not show up until a couple months later in the spring when those plants are leafing out. And the damage can include everything from leaf scorching, where the leaves are dead around the edges, to actually leaf dropping, where the leaves come out and look normal, but then they're going to fall off. And I've had that happen with my ligustrum 2 years in a row. And then it looks like it's growing great, and then all the leaves fall off, and then they come out again, then it's fine. So it's just something to, again, keep in your mind what happened weeks or months past that this person might be having a problem today. Temperature extremes, in the summer when it gets too hot, we get flash droughts. Obviously, extreme cold can damage plants. A lot of plants in our area were tending to be more in zone 8 now, which is a more mild zone. We were in 7B for a long time. But some plants might be right on the edge of their happiness zone, and we get a cold snap that might be an extreme for them. Sunlight, are they getting enough sunlight? Hey, a lot of people think, oh yeah, I have this sunny spot over here. Well, they might get 3 hours of sun. That's not enough for a sun-loving plant. So you've got to make sure that they understand to have the right plant in the right place, and that people tend to overestimate how much sun they get. And sunlight can change during different times of the year, so they may not even notice it during the time when it's critical for that plant that it's not getting enough. Soil compaction is a big one. Most of our people that call in with questions are living in urban or suburban neighborhoods where the soil is compacted from day one, from just the construction of their homes. And so that can be a real issue. Random acts of nature is lightning, things like that, hail damage. Those can be easy to recognize, but people may not realize that they had a hailstorm, and then they got these big holes in their hosta leaves, and they're like, what happened to my hosta? What kind of insect is doing this? Well, it was actually hail. And of course, heavy rains and floods can certainly be very damaging to plants. All right, everybody knows what signs and symptoms are? I'm seeing heads nodding. Is it confusing still to some people? Blank faces? Okay, a sign is the physical evidence of the problem. First, we're going to talk about signs and symptoms of pests, and then we'll talk about signs and symptoms of diseases. So here's some examples. This top one, does anybody know what this is? Yes, scale. This is scale. This is on crepe myrtle. This is a new problem for our region. Crepe myrtle bark scale. So it's something that when you see it, it's pretty easy to recognize. So I'm guessing you'll be getting calls about this more and more. So that's the actual pest itself. So that's a sign. Okay, symptoms. Symptoms are the plant's response to being attacked or infected. So they will have a physiological effect to that. So this first one is a peach that's been cat-faced by brown murmurated stink bug. And what does it do, Louise?
It kills the cells when
It lays
is
its
very small, and then as it grows, that area has dead cells.
Okay, so that's how that happens. So that's caused by an undergrowth of cells. contrasted to this here, which is actually an overgrowth of cells. This is a type of wasp that lays its egg in an oak leaf, and it releases chemicals that cause the plant cells to proliferate and grow. And while the larvae of the wasp, the eggs hatch, and the larvae are able to eat all this nutritious surroundings that they have there until it's all hollowed out and they escape and go on their merry way to infect new trees. So that is actually, people think that those are they call them insect galls, but people think it's the insect made that. No, the plant made that, but the insect made the plant make that. All right, how do insects damage plants? Well, there are three main ways. One is by feeding, and the other is nest and egg laying, like those two previous examples. And the third is spreading disease. So a lot of insects are capable of spreading viruses and other types of disease organisms to plants. Now, everybody know what this is a picture of? No? Close. Another happy one. Monarch. Okay, this is monarch. They look similar, they do. This is monarch on milkweed. Yes, the caterpillars have chewing parts and they're going to chew up that milkweed. And I would say, is this a pest? No, these are desirable. So hopefully you prefer the monarch butterflies over your milkweed. Plant enough, plant enough milkweed so that you have plenty for the monarchs. So this is only the one stage of the insect, right? It turns into a butterfly, and then the butterflies, they're beautiful. They help pollinate things. They're nectar eaters. They don't technically eat plants. Okay, there's different kinds of mouth parts. We'll talk about that, but just be aware that different stages of the insect can cause different kinds of damage than other stages. We talked about nest and egg laying and spreading of disease organisms. Okay, here's some feeding damage by different kinds of mouth parts. Stippling, this is azalea with lace bug on it. This is a picture from my yard, which I have a big problem with this. And I don't like to spray things very often, so plants are usually not too bad off. But you can see the kind of damage that's caused. It's pretty easy to recognize. This other one is caused by leaf miner, which the immature larvae are actually chewing through the leaves. So the first one is piercing, sucking, and this one is chewing. So those are the different ways that insects can damage by eating. All right, now we're going to talk about signs and symptoms of diseases, which are similar in that sense. Everybody know what this top one is? Yell it out. All right, powdery mildew. This is a really severe case, so that one's very easy to recognize. That's another one that, so you're already doing diagnosing, right? You're already good at this. All right, so that is, again, the physical evidence of the pathogen itself that you can see on the leaf. A symptom, again, is the physiological response by the plant. So this bottom one is a leaf spot on hydrangea, and you can see that. That's probably a fungal disease. Okay, there are many kinds of pathogens. We heard last week about the three main categories. Fungi, which is the number one. Far more diseases are caused by fungi than any other group. But there are also bacteria. Now, fungi are unique in that they can actually penetrate a leaf directly. Some do enter wounds, but some can actually penetrate healthy plant tissue. They have special organs that are enable them to do that. Whereas bacteria, they can only enter a plant through openings. So they can enter through stomates or through wounds. Bacteria are way, way smaller than fungi. Fungi, parts of them are microscopic, but if they're grown, if masses come together, you can see, obviously you see mushrooms, groups of mycelium, spores that are so abundant that you can see them. Bacteria you can only see with a microscope, a regular type of microscope you can see, not a dissecting scope, not the kind of scopes we have for class, but a compound microscope. You can see bacteria. And viruses are so small that even with a compound microscope, they cannot be seen. You have to have a special electron microscope to see viruses. And I don't know what the magnification is, but it's a lot. They're just really, really small. Now, these are the three main types of pathogenic organisms, but there are others. You heard last week about oomycetes, which are similar to fungi, but not really. And Mike made a statement that I heard a lot of people, what? He said, true fungi are more closely related to cows. And people were like, what? Well, he didn't mean they're closely related to cows. What he meant is that true fungi are more advanced than the oomycetes. Therefore, they're more related to animals in general than the oomycetes. The oomycetes are more related to plants. But neither one is closely related to either of those, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that was clear in your minds that fungi are not like cows. I just want to mention there are some other types of organisms you haven't heard about, such as, well, we talked, nematodes were mentioned. Nematodes are another. There are things called mycoplasmas, which are smaller than bacteria, but larger than viruses. There are plasmodia. There are viroids, which are even smaller than regular viruses. So there's a lot of other weird kinds of things out there that can infect plants. They're going to be the lesser things that you probably won't be exposed to very much. I just want you to be aware. Those are the main ones to know about. Think about nematodes too, because that can be fairly important. The oomycetes are important because Phytophthora and Pythium are really big disease causers, so they are important to know about. Okay, we talked about signs. Here's just some more examples of signs. A massive mycelia there that you can see, fruiting bodies, spores. And again, you're not going to see the individual spore unless you've got a good microscope, but you can see them when they're in masses or if they're in an encasement. And then ooze and slime can sometimes come out of the tree, and this would include parts of the causal organism in that ooze and slime. All right, symptoms of disease. Let's look at a few more. Plants have only a limited way that they can respond. So these are the main ways that plants respond to disease. So we have blights, kind of a dead tissue of leaves and stems. Cankers are open wounds that aren't able to close up. Wilts, everybody knows what a wilt is, a loss of turgor in the leaves and stems. Leaf spots, all kinds of leaf spots. Now, leaf spots can be very specific. So if you see a certain pattern on certain leaf spots, you'll know, oh, this is that particular disease. With leaf spots, very often the bacterial leaf spots are angular. And what that means is that, it doesn't show up on that. Okay. You have the veins here. Bacteria aren't able to cross over the veins right away. So they will have their lesions will form like a little in that shape, sort of triangular and angular in shape, whereas fungal spots can form, they don't care about the veins. They can just macerate the plant anyway. And then typical symptoms of viruses include mottles and mosaic patterns. Similar to, you think about some patterns that happen with nutritional deficiencies, you might think of as a virus, but the viruses are a little bit more random looking a lot of times than those nutritional diseases, which can have more of a uniform look. Then there are rots, stunting, and dieback, which is similar in some ways to the blight, just kind of that dying symptom. All right, you remember this from last week? Everybody understand that really well? I'll explain it to me. I'm gonna go over it again because this is a really, really important concept for plant pathology. It is the disease triangle. Some people call it the disease pyramid because they include time. And I think more plant pathologists call it the disease pyramid. So basically, you have to have three things in order for disease to occur. You have to have the susceptible host, the pathogen, and the environment. So just think about it. If you have a host that's susceptible and it's raining outside, which might make the conditions favorable for a particular pathogen, but that pathogen is nowhere to be found, your plant's still going to be healthy, right? But if the pathogen is there and it's one of those pathogens that likes moisture and the host is there, it's going to infect that host. But what if the host is not susceptible? You planted a resistant variety or you don't have the host for that particular pathogen. You're not going to get infection. And even if you have a host that's susceptible and the pathogen's there, then the environment is not favorable for infection, you won't get disease. And here's where time comes in. If you have, say you have these three things are here, though the pathogen and the host are here. Say if this pathogen needs moisture to germinate and infect the plant, and you have a half-hour rainstorm, that pathogen needs an hour or 5 hours to get going. So you don't have enough time for it to be able to grow and infect that plant. So that's why time is the fourth dimension in talking about the disease pyramid. So those are things, and if the plant is even something that might be susceptible, but it's in a really healthy condition and everything else is favorable, that plant may be able to resist the disease. This is like you. When you're run down, you haven't gotten enough sleep, you haven't been eating well, you've been out drinking and partying, and you get briefly exposed to somebody with a cold, and the next day you're like, oh, I feel sick. You're going to get it. But if you've been getting enough rest and eating well, you're likely to be able to resist that. It's the same with plants. When they're in a healthy and happy environment, they're more able to resist the problems that may occur. And this is what happens to my azaleas. I don't get to water them enough, and they get more susceptible to getting azalea lacebug. I have found. All right, so just to review, there's 4 categories here. The abiotic, remember A means without life and biotic means with life. So abiotic factors are cultural and environmental, and the biotic causal factors are pests and pathogens. Again, remember that a lot of these cultural and environmental factors are what's going to lead stress to that plant if they're not correct and allow more of these pests and pathogens to really make you have a problem or somebody have a problem if they're not doing the right things for the cultural and environmental. Of course, they can't help the by environment, but okay, this is just kind of to show you things to kind of look for. And each of these things, these steps that we're talking about, are helping you narrow down all the choices. So narrowing down things so that you can eliminate other possibilities so that you can kind of come up with a good hypothesis of what might be causing the problem. So looking for distribution patterns, random versus uniform, can help you understand whether something's biotic or abiotic. Hot spots, edges, diffuse along the edge in a field can help you understand that that's likely more a biotic cause versus something that's very linear. Remember last week Mike talked about, I think it was hellebores with a water distribution so that you could kind of gradually see how they changed along a line. Host specific versus not host specific. And most of these are true, but there are some generalities. Most pests are host specific, but there are some that have very wide host range. Japanese beetles, they do tend to like a rose family plants, but there's a lot in that family. So they're on a lot of different things. There are some fungi that have a very broad host range. Most, however, are much more narrow, and that will help you identify what's going on. So the distribution, season specific. Generally, if certain diseases are prevalent in the spring, others in the fall, that may clue you in onto what might be going on as well. And generally, abiotic causes tend to appear suddenly, and the biotic worsen with time. But again, they can act together. So you might, after Hurricane Debbie, boy, we had a lot of flooding, a lot of places where the plants sat in water for a long time, or if you didn't have good draining soil. I had things that all of a sudden they were fine, and then after Debbie, they were like really sad and dying. So drought is another issue, and heat. So those are things that can be a biotic cause. They can lead to stress in the plant. If the drought doesn't kill it itself, it may allow a disease to take hold or a pest to take hold. Okay, number 9 is distribution on the plants themselves. If you think about the names of a lot of diseases, they're called leaf blight or leaf spot, or even specifically hydrangea leaf spot. So if you've got a hydrangea leaf and you've got a spot on it, you got an idea where to go. Okay, so this will help in your search for figuring out what the causal problem is. So you're going to look for patterns on the individual organs. Again, we talked about in relation to the veins, how bacteria tend to be constrained by the veins. So that can lead you to help that. Not all, but in a lot of cases, you might see that type of symptom. Spots that have particular patterns like targets and certain rings and colors can also help you clue in on what particular fungus might be causing the problem. And of course, as the disease progresses as time goes on. You're going to look at old versus new growth. Some problems occur more on old growth and others occur more on new growth. Look for uniformity. I mentioned bullseye pattern. And again, that they have specific organ-specific names. All right, so timing is another thing. When did symptoms first appear? What season is it? As I said, a lot of diseases are seasonal, very specific. There's some on tomato. We have early blight of tomato and late blight of tomato. And one way to distinguish what's causing that is when is this disease occurring? So that's important. Again, I told you to think about timing. Things happen at different times of the year that may affect whether a plant is getting something. This time of year, there's lots of secondary plant disease out there, a lot of things that don't really need to worry about. Those leaves are going to fall off the plant anyway, so you don't need to worry about it. And a lot of leaf spot on the trees. These are not really pathogens. They're just secondary. They're taking advantage of the leaf kind of plant not being as full of vigor anymore, but it doesn't really matter. It's not going to harm the life of the plant. Things happen during different seasons that you need to be aware of that a lot of people, again, don't think about. Pines lose their needles in the fall as well as the citrus trees. They keep most of their needles, but they still lose some. And a lot of times people don't realize that. Why is my plant's an evergreen? Why is it losing leaves? Why is it losing needles? It's normal. The leaf itself is not evergreen, just the plant overall. So these are the kinds of things you want to look for with the timing aspect.